He disappeared during a game of hide-and-seek amid laughter, birthday cake, and sunshine, and not a single scream was ever heard. Malik Hughes, age 9, vanished without a trace at a local community park on his own birthday, while children laughed and the cake sat untouched. He slipped out of his mother's sight for just 2 minutes. There were no cameras, no witnesses. Police said he may have wandered off, but his mother knew because a mother's heart always knows. 12 years later, while volunteering to clean out an old school storage room slated for demolition, she saw it a rusted keychain shaped like a spaceship, worn, but unmistakable, etched on its side, still faintly visible. M.H. 9, and from that moment, everything began to move again. Amina Hughes never thought she'd survive the loss of her child, but here she was, 12 years later, still waking up each morning, still placing her feet on the cold floor, still making a cup of black coffee and staring out the window. Her small home sat on Lynch Street, in the southern end of Jackson, Mississippi, a working-class black neighborhood where folks knew each other's names, shared fried chicken on Sundays, and sometimes shared a quiet silence when a child didn't come home. Amina used to be the lead nurse in the ER at the regional hospital, a job that demanded speed, resilience, and a heart that wasn't allowed to break. She'd seen it, addicts, abuse survivors, lonely elders, but nothing ever made her feel as helpless as she did that one summer day. Malik was her only child. He was born at a time when she was ready to give up, after her husband left without warning, after her mother died of a sudden stroke, when she had exactly $74 left in her purse. Malik was the last bit of light in her dark room, the only reason she kept going. He loved space. By age 6, he could name Saturn's moons, devoured books about space travel, and once declared he'd build his own spaceship one day. Amina used to joke, "If you ever disappear, it's probably because NASA took you early." She never thought that line would return to haunt her like some cruel prophecy. The day Malik went missing, everything stopped. She couldn't listen to music, couldn't step into his room. The galaxy-patterned blanket still lay untouched on the bed, his small sneakers neatly lined by the rug. Once, she threw a load of his clothes into the wash, and when that familiar scent rose from the drum, she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing until she couldn't breathe. They say time heals, but for Amina, time only let the pain gather dust. She lived in a version of Jackson that no longer had spring. Every corner, every streetlight still held echoes of her son. The neighborhood, resilient despite its struggles, had always tried to hold together. They threw small block parties for the kids, pooled money when someone got sick, swapped vegetables from backyard gardens. But after Malik disappeared, something changed. The silence grew thicker. No one knew what to say to the mother of a missing child. Slowly, they stopped meeting her gaze. Amina never left Jackson even though she could have. She'd been offered a head nursing role in Atlanta. A cousin had invited her to move to Charlotte, but she stayed. Because if Malik was still out there, he would still be here, in this city, and if he ever came back, she had to be there to meet him. That decision made her world smaller. Friends moved on, started families, left the neighborhood. Only a few remained like Miss Yvonne, the elderly neighbor 3 doors down, who still dropped off sweetbread on the porch without a word, just left the box on the step. "We haven't forgotten her," she once said, still using her for Malik, because when he was little, he wore his curly hair long and built astronaut helmets out of cardboard. Jackson wasn't a terrifying city, but it wasn't gentle, either. Not for a single black mother with no more family left. When the disappearance happened, Amina did everything, printed flyers, knocked on doors within a 5-mile radius, spoke to local radio, hired a private investigator, a man who talked too much and found nothing but doubt. Police were active at first, but by year 2, she only got updates if she showed up in person. By year 3, the file was marked pending. She knew what that meant. The city moved on. Malik's school was demolished for budget cuts, now just an empty lot with a no trespassing sign. The park where his birthday party was held had been renamed, and the old wooden bench where Amina once waited had been replaced with aluminum. But for her, nothing changed. Same air, same sun, same grief. One time, she saw a boy around, 10 riding a bike down the street, wearing an orange backpack just like Malik's. Her heart pounded so hard, she ran outside, calling his name before she even knew what she was doing. When the boy turned, he wasn't Malik. Just another child. A child who got to grow up. That small moment sparked something. Amina began keeping a journal not for herself, but for her son. She wrote about the weather, local news, her dreams, fading memories she feared would slip away. Today, I dreamed you were still wearing that cardboard space helmet, and this time, you really flew, but when you came back to tell me about it, I couldn't remember what your voice sounded like. She filled hundreds of pages with words like that. The journals now sat in a wooden cabinet in her bedroom, the only proof her love hadn't changed. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, Amina would drive around the old neighborhood, where everything began. Past the community center where the birthday party was held, past the little corner store where she and Malik bought ice cream, past College Hill Park, where the old metal slide once scared Malik because it was too steep. She remembered every tree, every crack in the pavement. In the glove box of her car was a small supply kit duct tape, scissors, hot glue, colored paper, not for work, but because sometimes she stopped to tape up a torn sign or fix a crooked nameplate. It didn't mean much to anyone else, but to her. It kept the silence from swallowing her whole. The community around her, quiet as it was, never completely disappeared. She saw them at church events, even though she didn't go. At summer fairs, on school bulletin boards. People didn't ask, "Are you okay anymore?" But sometimes, a stranger would gently squeeze her shoulder in passing, no words, just presence. Malik wasn't the only missing child from the area, but he was one of the few who barely made the news. No national segments, no viral hashtags. Once, a young reporter from New Orleans wanted to do a piece on forgotten missing persons and interviewed Amina, but when it aired, her story was just 17 seconds long, ending with "he may have wandered off and chosen not to return." That night, Amina smashed the TV remote. What haunts her most isn't the pain, it's the fading. The feeling that her son was being erased. That names like Malik Hughes, 9 years old, missing were just data points in some forgotten file. So she made her own ritual. Every year, on Malik's birthday, she went back to the old park. She brought a small cake, 9 candles, and sat there until the sun disappeared behind the trees. No one ever came, just the wind and the hum of late summer cicadas. But in the 12th year, everything changed. She returned to the abandoned school to help a charity sort through old supplies. And in a dusty plastic bin, wedged between torn books and broken toys, she found something that had waited for her, the keychain. A tiny spaceship, rusted, but unmistakable. Etched into the side were 3 worn characters, M-Edich. 9. She had given it to him, days before his birthday. She remembered his grin, how he clipped it to his backpack with pride. Now, her fingers trembled as she picked it up. Her heart thudded out of rhythm, and in that moment, after 12 years of silence, she knew Malik had never gone too far. July 17th, 2010. Jackson was blazing beneath a cloudless sky. Sunlight filtered through the old trees in College Hill Park, casting golden stripes across the grass. Amina had chosen this spot for Malik's 9th birthday party, an open space with long wooden tables, a slide, swings, and, most importantly, a small wooded area out back where kids could imagine anything: secret bases, rocket ships, or undiscovered planets. She arrived early, laid out tablecloths, arranged boxes of fried chicken sandwiches and egg salad. She brought a homemade birthday cake shaped like a silver spaceship, with tiny candles posed like rocket boosters, ready to be lit. Malik wore a red t-shirt and a cardboard astronaut helmet she'd helped him make the night before. He ran wild with his classmates, playing tag, yelling, laughing. At one point, he crept up to her and whispered, "Mom, I'm gonna find planet M9 in the woods. I'm sure it's there." Amina smiled and adjusted his helmet. Everything felt normal. Too normal. So normal that no one noticed when the clock ticked 2 minutes past the last time anyone had seen Malik. As the group began singing Happy Birthday, Amina called out for him, expecting him to pop out from behind a tree or slide like kids do to surprise you, but he didn't appear. She moved through the crowd, scanning faces. Has anyone seen Malik silence? One child thought he'd run toward the woods. Another wasn't sure. At first, Amina wasn't scared. Maybe he was hiding. But after 10 minutes of calling with no answer, her heart began to squeeze with panic. She ran through the park, breath ragged, throat dry. A park employee dialed 911. When police arrived 23 minutes after the first call, the nightmare truly began. Officers and volunteers fanned out. They used loudspeakers, scent dogs, flashlights, scanning every inch of the wooded area. But there was nothing. No helmet, no footprints, no voice calling back. The park's surveillance cameras were broken. Maintenance funding had been cut earlier that year. A grainy image from a nearby library parking lot camera showed nothing useful. Amina stood frozen in the chaos, still holding the cake, knife, its plastic handle snapped in her grip. In the days that followed, Amina barely slept. She refused to leave the scene, ignoring the summer heat and police advice. Every rustle in the trees, every crackle in the bushes made her flinch. Her voice gave out from calling Malik's name into the night. People brought her water, sandwiches, sleeping pills. She took none of it. How could she eat? Not knowing where her son was, police launched a wide-area search the park, nearby neighborhoods, the woods behind the school, even the city landfill. They checked vehicle logs, interviewed unhoused people in the area, and reviewed local criminal records. But nothing. No sightings, no leads, no witnesses. The trail went cold at first. The local media covered the story, but not for long. Malik wasn't the kind of child who made national headlines. He wasn't white. He wasn't blue-eyed. Local coverage dwindled. A short article read, "Black boy missing from park." Amina began posting flyers everywhere, bus stops, lampposts, shop windows. She printed hundreds from her savings and sold her old wedding ring to pay for the printer rental on each flyer. She wrote a line by hand, "Malik loves spaceships. If you see a child drawing stars or rockets, please call." She didn't just hope he was alive, she felt it, a quiet hum in her chest, always present. Sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night from dreams where Malik stood in the doorway, wearing his helmet, whispering, "Mom, I came back, but there's no light where I was." The community around her began to fracture. Some rallied, organizing searches, fundraisers, banners. Others withdrew not out of malice, but fear. A child vanishing with no explanation rattled everyone, especially when it happened in daylight. During laughter, it made people think, what if it were mine? Amina tried not to believe the worst, but when the lead officer was reassigned just 2 months in and left behind an incomplete report, she realized she was being left behind. About a week after the disappearance, a man named Terrence Jefferson came forward. He was homeless and had been sleeping in the woods that night. Police didn't take him seriously. He had a history of mental illness and odd claims. But Terrence was adamant. That night, he'd seen a faint green light, like from an old flashlight, and heard small wheels scraping the ground. Not a car, like a cart or dolly. He said, "I live in the dark. I see when someone's trying to hide." Police took his statement and never came back. Amina only found out because Ms. Yvonne, who often brought Terrence sandwiches, told her she visited him herself. He shook his head. "They don't listen, but I saw it. Someone left the park that night, and not everyone walked out on their own 2 feet. That line haunted Amina for weeks." She returned to the woods, following the route Terrence described. Sure enough, behind a dense patch of brush, there was an old, cracked concrete path leading straight behind the abandoned elementary school. She alerted the police. They sent a team to look, but found nothing new. The area was never cordoned off. One officer told her bluntly, "If something happened here, we'd have found it by now." Amina began going back alone. She brought an old camera, a flashlight. Once, she joined a group of law students doing charity work. They found nothing concrete, except for a silver piece of plastic caught in moss along a wall. Amina knew what it was immediately part of the spaceship keychain she'd made for Malik, the one with MH9 etched into the side. But she didn't get to keep it. A storm hit days later. When she returned, the area was washed clean. Police called it coincidence, probably an old toy. They said, not enough to reopen the file. And so, Malik Hughes' disappearance was buried until 12 years later, when Amina stumbled across something she never expected. Not in the woods, not at home, but in a dusty storage bin. Inside the old elementary school's archive room, there it was, the keychain, whole, rusted, but intact. How did it end up there? Who put it there? And most of all, why had no one ever searched that place more carefully? From the start, the keychain was found on a cold December Saturday morning. Amina had joined a group of volunteers clearing out an old elementary school before its scheduled demolition. It was the school where Malik had attended first grade, just a few blocks from College Hill Park. Behind the library wing was a forgotten concrete yard where storage containers once held janitorial equipment and discarded furniture over the years. The area had grown wild, grass up to the knees, broken bins and rusting cart frames littered around. That's where it happened. While sorting through old plastic crates, Amina's hand touched something small and icy cold. The keychain, shaped like a spaceship, the same one she had handmade for Malik on his 9th birthday. The faded silver paint, the letters M.H. 9 shed once etched with a soldering pen, rusted and chipped, but unmistakable. The moment she touched it, she froze. Her hands trembled like she'd just touched her son. This object could not be here unless someone had carried it and left it behind. Amina called the police, but like so many times before, they dismissed it. Could have been dropped by anyone. They said, cold, dismissive. But this time, she didn't stop. With help from Marcus, a volunteer structural engineer, Amina reviewed the school's old schematics, including the outdoor maintenance yard. They discovered one particular storage container locked, since 2011 had been listed as damaged, but never inspected during the original 2010 investigation. Police claimed it only held broken furniture, no relevance. But Amina felt otherwise. She got permission from the volunteer team and opened it herself. The lock was rusted, but with basic tools. They pried it loose. Inside chaos, old supplies piled high. But in the back left corner, behind dried paint cans, was a nondescript cardboard box sealed with brown tape. Inside were 3 items, a crayon drawing of a spaceship labeled M9, a small, dust-covered child's sneakers still holding its shape, a notebook, childishly scrawled in pencil, Space Journey. These weren't fabricated. They weren't random. They were his. While volunteers documented the scene, a criminal justice student named Deshaun offered to help Amina review past staff rosters from 2008 to 2012. He found a name that had been absent from the original reports: Maurice Lania, part-time maintenance worker. He'd once been reprimanded for odd behavior, specifically keeping keys to restricted outdoor areas, including the container they had just opened. Maurice lived in a trailer park about 30 minutes from Jackson, on the edge of the woods near Bentonia. Amina didn't call ahead. She drove out, her chest burning with the quiet fury of 12 long years. But it wasn't Maurice who answered the door. It was a young woman named Janelle, who said she was his niece when she heard Amina's name. She froze visibly, then hesitantly invited her in, inside the trailer. Amina saw them crayon drawings of rockets and planets on the wall, a figure in a crude spacesuit labeled M9. Under the table, a cardboard model spaceship, identical to the one Malik drew for his last birthday. When Amina asked, Janelle said it was just toys from a cousin, but when asked which cousin, she fell silent, hands clenched. Soon. Maurice Lane returned, thin, graying, eyes wired with tension. When Amina mentioned the keychain in the container, he froze. I didn't do anything. He blurted, I was just told to keep the key. They said not to ask questions. Who told you? Amina asked. I can't say. They said I'd lose my job. My brakes were cut once. His voice cracked. That changed everything. This wasn't a babysitter keeping secrets. This was someone threatened, coerced, possibly manipulated as part of something larger. Amina immediately filed a sworn affidavit. She turned over the items to a new civil rights attorney, someone willing to fight to reopen the case. But things didn't stop there. A former neighbor from the old school community heard about her renewed investigation and called her in the middle of the night. I need to tell you something, he said. About that night, about the green light behind the library. His name was Mr. Otis Walker. He used to live directly behind the elementary school's library, barely 20 paces from the container yard. In 2010, he was 62, retired early after a minor stroke, living alone, suffering from chronic insomnia. Amina had seen him before, but they had never spoken, this time. He invited her in. "I've wrestled with this for years," he began. "But when I saw folks poking around again, I knew I couldn't keep quiet." He said that the night after Malik went missing, around 2 a.m., he was drinking tea on his porch when he saw faint green flickering light behind the library. At first, he thought it was teenagers or unhoused folks, but the light was different, not a flashlight, more like low-power machinery. He walked to the fence, peeking through a gap, and saw 2 figures, one tall, one shorter, moving near the containers. "I couldn't tell if they were carrying something or pushing it," he said, "but I heard the sound of metal gliding on concrete. Then darkness. Silence." He never reported it. No one asked, and at the time, he wasn't even sure what he saw. But now, after hearing about the keychain, he knew it wasn't just a dream. Otis' testimony, combined with prior witness accounts, Terrence's from the woods. Thelma's earlier formed an eerie pattern, 3 separate people, 3 different perspectives, all mentioning green light, metallic scraping, and activity near that container. 3 voices, 12 years apart, never connected until now. Amina brought all of its sworn statements, recovered items, timelines to her legal team, and the investigative journalists backing her case. For the first time, they had enough grounds to demand a formal reopening under the suspicion of criminal action. And then came the final thread. Forensics had just returned results from the child's sweater and the Space Journey notebook. DNA had been recovered. It matched someone once listed, then quietly removed from the original suspect pool. Someone Amina remembered clearly, not Maurice Lane, but the man who had stood right beside her, the one who led the very first search party in the park when the DNA results came back. Amina sat frozen in her chair, palms drenched in sweat. On the screen were 2 lines, the hair sample from the child-sized sweater found in the container and the biological trace under the M9 drawing. Both partially matched the genetic profile of Clinton Rawls, the police officer who led the original investigation into Malik's disappearance in 2010. Clinton Rawls was no stranger. He was the first at the scene, the one who told Amina there were no signs of foul play, and the officer who closed the case after a year of dead ends. He'd always been polite, said the right things, but whenever Amina pressed him about checking the school grounds, the library cameras, or interviewing Terrence, he deflected, "We looked. Nothing there." Now Amina realized it wasn't that he didn't see, it was that he didn't want to see. Rawls had retired 3 years ago, living with his wife and 3 children in Grenada, north of Jackson. When the new team contacted him, he denied everything. "I never touched any evidence beyond the scene." He said, "There must be an error in the test." But when asked if he ever held a key to the container yard, he hesitated. Personnel files from 2010 showed Rawls had a master key for emergency access area son handed to him by Maurice Lane in the week after Malik vanished. Nobody ever inventoried it. Nobody ever searched that container. Amina went quiet as she recalled a small detail 3 days after Malik disappeared. She saw Rawls emerging from behind the library, sweat-soaked, clutching a leather-bound notebook. When she'd asked him where he was, he'd said, "Checking the emergency exit. Now." It no longer sounded innocent. Her legal team immediately petitioned the state police to reopen the case, naming Rawls as a potential indirect suspect or accessory who'd concealed evidence, but with his old badge, stretched connections, and retiree immunity. He was hard to touch. The question now was why would Clinton Rawls, a father, an officer aide in hiding a child for all those years in the following days? Independent investigators combed through the rest of Rawls' case history. A troubling pattern emerged. Between 2002 and 2011, Rawls had led investigations into 4 missing children in poor, Black communities across central Mississippi. 3 cases ended with no trace. The 4th was chalked up as runaway, but the child's last known location remained unverified. Amina read those reports as her blood went cold. Nobody ever asked why a mid-level officer was assigned so many similar cases and why each dissolved into oblivion within months. Then a 2005 note stopped them in their tracks. Rawls had been collaborating with an independent therapist, Dr. Lewis Faulkner, who treated traumatized children. Dr. Faulkner. Amina shuddered, not because she'd heard the name before, but because she'd just seen it on a name tag at Pine Hill Nursing Center on the anonymous patient she visited 2 weeks earlier. The man's eyes, though silent, had flickered when she held up Malik's spaceship keychain. Amina returned to Pine Hill, no longer under the guise of volunteer work. The head nurse confirmed the patient, labeled John Doe, unknown identity, had paperwork signed by Rawls as his legal guardian and care costs covered by Faulkner Foundation for Youth Recovery for the first 3 years. The dots connected swiftly. Rawls had worked with Faulkner, whose license had been revoked in 2012, for unauthorized interventions with minors. No one was prosecuted, the child never emerged. Rawls was also the officer who'd arranged care for a child coded as non-communicative. Panic symptom, a child who tumbled from official records. If that child wasn't Malik, then who was he, armed with Malik's photos, baby pictures, first-grade snapshots, and the M9 drawing from the container? Amina pressed for a meeting under monitored supervision. The center agreed. In a quiet room mixed with antiseptic and jasmine, she saw him, the young man at the window, back straight, hands in his lap, eyes on the sparrows outside. He turned as the door opened. His gaze met hers, not surprised, not fearful, just a look that said he'd waited for this moment all his life. Amina said nothing. Slowly, she laid the old spaceship keychain on the table, chipped silver. M9 etched by hand. Silence followed. He studied its steady hands. Not shaking, he touched the engraving like he was touching something of his own flesh. Then, softly, his first words since their meeting. That day, I hid under the buffet table. I didn't hear anyone scream. I thought it was a game. His voice was hoarse, hesitant as if relearning how to speak, but each word struck Amina's chest like a hammer. She choked back tears, because she knew if this was Malik, he needed to say it himself. He continued. I remember the man's voice. Not someone I knew. He wore a uniform. He said, "Your mother will pick you up later, but you have to come now." I was scared, but he held me like he was hiding something. Amina rose, that trembling knot of hope and fear inside her. She reached for him, then paused. Afraid. If she was wrong, 12 years of yearning would shatter in an instant. He unfolded a small piece of paper from his pocket. On it was the spaceship drawing M9, just like the one she kept. And in the corner, scribbled in his own hand, I remember the orange-flavored cake. Only Malik knew the cake that year had been orange and honey-flavored, his choice. Nobody else remembered. Nobody else ever mentioned it. Amina gave in. She dropped her defenses. She held his hand, no more need for tests. Legal confirmation. Her heart recognized her child in that one breath, but the reunion lasted only a minute because the young man, eyes haunted with loss, whispered, "Mommy, will you forgive me?" If I didn't try to run away, Amina left Pine Hill in a daze, each step toward home feeling surreal. Jackson's warm afternoon air felt heavy, muffled beneath the gravity of an incomplete truth. Malik, if indeed the boy she met, had confirmed his memory. But he also whispered something she'd never prepared herself to hear. I didn't run, but I didn't want to be found either. Those words cut silent and deep. Every mother fears even imagining the possibility her child believing safety meant staying hidden, unlovable if returned. Amina tried to comprehend. Maybe her son was drugged, confined, psychologically manipulated. But if he'd been close, why no sign, no scream, no note, no reach? She returned home and opened her investigative journal names. Timelines, witness statements, everything. She began to doubt herself. Had she missed something? Did she misread the signs Malik left behind? Had someone else intervened, teaching him a different kind of home? Then, a new lead came from law students reviewing the hospital records for John Doe Malik at Pine Hill in 2015. Tucked in a handwritten note by the now-deceased doctor, the phrase "Quiet Wind Camp," not in Mississippi, but in Tennessee, an old private facility once censured for imprisoning children without legal guardians. Quiet Wind Camp had been shut down in 2014 over abuse allegations. Most records were purged as unverified or confidential. Could Malik have been transferred there during the years she thought him missing or dead? If so, the system layer upon layer had conspired to hide him. Amina was staggered. Clinton Rawls might only have been a cog in a darker machine, and Malik's memories, were they his own, or others' construction? 1 week after their meeting, Amina gained more frequent access to Malik, but each visit raised more questions. He was quiet, distant eyes wandering, photos, homemade recordings of lullabies, and one elicited strong reaction. Questions about that July day were met with airy replies. It's like a dream torn in two. Then, at her 4th visit, Malik shocked her. "Did you ever abandon me?" "Mother." Her heart cracked. She shook her head, tears threatening, but he stared coldly as if testing memory. Or his own. "I don't remember clearly, but there was a voice saying, 'You were too tired to care anymore.'" Someone had planted that voice in him. Amina returned home, replayed that moment of mother's heartbreaking collapse into doubt. Had her exhaustion been interpreted by a child as betrayal, and if a stranger offered safety? Unconditional care, had Malik chosen that still? Part of her recoiled at such thoughts, but her guilt whispered, what if? In her love, delivered too forcefully, her child had lost trust in returning, and so she faced the hardest truth. She and everyone could no longer be certain what was real. What truly happened in those 2 minutes in the parkour, in the 12 years that followed? Who orchestrated this child's disappearance? And if not an individual actor, but a system, how deep did the design go? To rewrite a mind then. 3 days later, a package arrived, unsigned, unannounced. Inside an old mini cassette and a note. If you want to know what happened in the first 48 hours, Amina and Deshawn digitized it. 4 minutes and 12 seconds of audio gasping breaths, metal creaks, and at 2:41, a man's voice, slow and firm. "You'll stay here for a bit. Don't be afraid. Your mother didn't know how to love properly." Well, start over. Okay. A bolt of recognition, that voice, Clinton Rawls. It was no smoking gun, but undeniable evidence that Rawls had direct contact with Malik Hand seemed to be rebuilding the boy's sense of self, manipulating memory itself. Rawls abruptly left Mississippi soon after. He claimed that all actions were aimed to protect a child from a dangerous environment, neither admitting nor denying holding Malik. The social media world erupted some questioning if Malik had truly been safe at home. Amina found herself both defended and vilified. Could she have been that mother whose child felt forced to flee? She didn't reply online. In her journal, she wrote one sentence: "If he's forgotten it all, then maybe my memory will be the place he finds himself again." Silence can be its own kind of crime, but even silence can't hide forever what lies embedded in memory, and some truths once uncovered can't be buried again. Malik was officially returned to Amina's custody after 4 months of psychological evaluation and identity verification. No one else came forward as a legal guardian. No one challenged the process. It was as if the very system that once held him now wanted the matter to quietly fade, just like so many stories that had faded into silence in Amina's community. He moved back into the little house on Lynch Street, where almost nothing had changed since the day he vanished. Amina cleaned out his old room, refolded the galaxy print blanket, and placed his old spaceship model back on the shelf. Malik spoke little. He kept to himself, rarely stepped outside, and struggled to sleep when he heard footsteps. But one March evening, Amina saw him standing alone on the porch, staring up at the stars. In his hand was an old sketchbook. She didn't disturb him. But the next morning, on the kitchen table, lay a new drawing, a spacecraft drifting through the stars. Its name was written clearly beneath it. Home 9. Amina didn't know what the future would bring. She didn't know if Malik would ever fully recover his memories, or if he'd live forever with a fractured sense of self. But she knew one thing: love doesn't need memory to exist. Only needs someone who refuses to let go. And she, for 12 long years, had never once stopped seeing her son, even if only in her imagination. Clinton Rawls was never charged. Independent investigations couldn't trace any larger network behind the events. Dr. Faulkner died before he could be summoned. Every lead ran into a familiar wall where cases involving missing black children often stall lack of resources, lack of media, lack of attention. But Amina wasn't silent anymore. She began telling her story at forums, community workshops, quiet live streams. She received hundreds of messages from other mothers, those who'd lost children, who'd been ignored, who'd once been told, maybe they just ran away. They wrote me too. And maybe the point isn't to answer every question, but to keep the question alive, so that children like Malik are never forgotten again.